Hey all, Farmer Jesse here. It's fall. It's a really nice, cool fall, foggy morning. We in the sort of no-till market garden community call this go time. Okay, nobody actually calls it go time. But what if I start calling it go time? Okay, yeah, I think it's a bad idea. What I mean by that is essentially this is a great time if you're interested in getting into no-till farming or gardening or want to transition your farm or start a new no-till garden. Now's the time. Today, I thought I would discuss all the different ways to no-till that I can think of. There are probably more. These are the ones I know of or I've tried. So let's do it. It's go time. All right, no-till method number one. Let's say you're transitioning, or let's say you just have some bare ground that you can kind of work. And that may come from using tarps like this. So you could take a pasture, mow it down, put some tarps down, and then you'd have dirt to work with. And that would take a while, to get that to break down. But essentially, you could break that down and then sow some cover crop. I talked about this in an earlier video, which I think will come up on this side or this side. I'll probably be wrong about it. I'm professionally wrong about things. The cover crop idea is essentially you're sowing a cover crop in the fall or the spring or whenever makes sense for your garden, and then you're crimping that into the soil. You're letting that break down, maybe under tarps, and then you're just pulling that aside and planting into it. Putting it on the soil like that acts as a mulch, and a great example of this, somebody to follow, is Frith Farm. Now again, I talked about them in that earlier video that I put a card up for. If you're interested in the cover crop method, it's great for transitioning and it can be used as a never-till system as long as you can figure out a good way to get the cover crop actually into the soil and germinated. One that I'm not really gonna get into because I just don't know enough about it is a production model of grain growing and sort of the bigger agriculture options. This is more for small market gardening, but check out Jeff Moyer's done a lot of work on this at the Rodale Institute. Gabe Brown, his new book is coming out. I'm gonna review it for Hobby Farms next week. I just read it, it's awesome. Yeah, check out those resources for sort of no-till farming on a larger scale, and also maybe there is some option going forward in terms of seed drilling on a bio-intensive system. I don't know if anybody's really doing that beyond, like Frith Farm doing the cover crop and the no-till, transplants, but I definitely see potential there. So we should keep an eye on that and we should talk about that. So let me know if you know of anybody doing the bio-intensive thing in that sort of seed drilling method. I've had the idea of trying to implement a sort of Fukuoka style seed balls. You can go check that out. It's an idea, mixing it with some clay and getting it to germinate on the surface. That's a possibility. There are other possibilities in terms of, using just a seeder if you've got somewhat loose soil to work with. So that's one option, is the cover crop option. Option number two is the sort of no-dig deep mulch method that's kind of championed by Richard Perkins and by Charles Dowding and us, really. I mean, we're not quite going as deep as they are on our mulch, but maybe we should be, and also we could be. We could be going deeper. This is one thing that I'm sort of learning, is that the deeper your mulch, obviously the better weed suppression from your pasture or your previous garden, depending on if you're never tilling or transitioning. So essentially what it would be, you'd mow it down, you would put a lot of compost, I'm talking maybe 6 inches, on top of your pasture, and then you'd put a tarp over that over the winter, and that would help to break down that pasture and let that sort of start to become a garden. In that situation, I would probably still use a broad fork, at least for the first year, depending on the kind of soil that I just transitioned. If it's heavy clay, definitely gonna wanna think about doing some sort of broad forking. You can also, and I think this may be a good idea, put some sort of barrier, not like landscape fabric, like cardboard or something in between the pasture and the compost that you're putting down. So if you're putting down a deep layer of mulch, you're gonna want something to stop those weeds from coming up through that mulch. I think it's probably not a bad idea in general. I kind of wish I had that in my paths because I do get a little, that's kale, but it's weed pressure in this case. So I do get a little bit of weed pressure in our paths, even though they're mulched. Yeah, it's not a bad idea. All right, next no-till idea or method would be the straw or hay mulch method. This is our original way of going no-till. When Hannah and I did it way back in the day, this is what we did, is we put a bunch of hay down, pushed out big round bales really thick, and then pulled that aside and planted into it. The soil loved it. And you know what else loved it? The weeds loved it. The weeds loved it because grass will germinate, doesn't even need the soil, it will germinate in the inside of the hay. So it'll come up through the hay without any struggle. And so if part of the reason that you're going no-till is to suppress weeds, I don't recommend hay. Now, straw has potential as long as it doesn't have any weed seed in it. Wheat seed or barley seed or whatever the straw, rice. Yes, rice? Anything that's gonna germinate. Rice? Because that same thing will happen where it'll get moist and start to rot, and then it'll be a layer for that sort of thing to germinate in. And yeah, I'm gonna end that sentence on preposition. But basically, if you wanted to do it that way, if you had a good source of straw or a good source of hay and you really are into that method, I think it has potential. I definitely think it has potential in the heat of the south or in drier areas that are also really sunny and hot where you run into a lot of evaporation or you want to actually cool the soil a little bit. I think there's potential there and I'm going to play with it in future videos. This is a great opportunity to tell you about the No-Till Market Gardening Patreon group. Go check it out because by contributing to that, you allow me the opportunity to experiment a little bit with this stuff. But also, as I've said in other videos, you know, if we get enough people involved in that, then maybe I can start paying you guys to make videos and do experiments on your farms. So just check that out. Link here. Link is down in the show notes as well. So on to the next no-till thing. All right, another method is the back to Eden method, which is instead of straw or compost, it's wood chips. Doesn't, in my mind, replicate a high production system. So I fear that you wouldn't be able to be as productive if you're just going into wood chips because the amount of nitrogen that would be required for those wood chips to really break down. Seeing some of the arguments, just does not look like it would be productive enough for us. It wouldn't fit into our bio-intensive system. So if you're growing for production, it may not be the one I recommend, but that said, I don't want to disparage that guy or anyone else who's using that method. I'm professionally wrong about things. Obviously, it works for him. If you want to do it, it's essentially just laying down a bunch of wood chips in place of all the other methods that I said before. Like I said, it's not one I necessarily would recommend, but I've never tried it, so I don't want to knock it before I rock it. Also run into a lot when you talk about no-till, this sort of like gray area of no-till, which I think is fine. Like, I don't have any problem with this really, really minimal tillage models. One that I think is really great and obviously super productive is Neversink's Connor Crickmore's. His is really cool. I think that, you know, he's just doing a little bit of light sort of surface tillage. He was, and maybe that's changed, but my understanding of his method is a little bit of surface tillage and some broad forking, but that's kind of it. And I think the most important thing when talking about no-till is we're all trying to do the same thing, right? We're trying to be productive in our gardens and also be productive ecologically. So if he can do that, or you can do that, or any farmer can do that in a really, really minimal or low tillage system, I think that's great. And I think that if you're trying to work towards a more ecologically sound system that is more fungally driven, has more mycorrhizal fungi, has a better balance between the bacteria and the fungi, more closer to 1-to-1 instead of more bacteria, which is very common in tilled gardens, then I think that's great. Like, that's what we should all be working towards. I want to encourage people who are doing the no-till thing to stay away from the dogma, to get away from feeling like this is no-till and this is not no-till. Because the reality is, as long as we're achieving that, then I think we're achieving what we all want to achieve. I don't know, what do you guys think? Is there anything I missed? Tell me. Let me know in the comments section. Tweet me. I tweet sometimes. I'm not very good at it. For some reason, my brain doesn't translate to Twitter very well, but I try really hard. You can check me out on Facebook, Instagram, you can check out our farm on Instagram, all these things. Never shout these out, but I should. Check out the Patreon page. Make sure to like this video. If you like this video, also make sure to subscribe. There's a little bell that'll pop up next to that subscription button. I recommend clicking it. I recommend lots of things, but that's one of the things I recommend. Other than that, y'all, there's Scooter on the tarp. Kitty kitty. All right, with that, we'll see you later. Bye.